Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of boards, recorder of videos, and a tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video view series, where we take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. With this video, I'll be reviewing the 5th level dungeon crawl adventure, The Crypt of Somber Hill, designed by RuneGM, aka Brandon Zambrano, for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy the content, consider using my affiliate links for your online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/RogueWatson. The cover art makes this look like a, I don't know, 8-bit style RPG, which I do have nostalgia for. The actual dungeon adventure is a very classic dungeon crawl in that it's most of the adventure takes place in a dungeon. It's a crypt, which is probably the most classic location for a dungeon. And it's got very clear like bad guys. It feels very old school, and I don't mean that in a positive light nor a negative light. That's just kind of a descriptor, as if I was calling this like a horror or a western or something. It's almost like a genre. It's like, hey, it's just a classic, kind of straightforward dungeon crawl. But then as I delved into it, it's got a lot of good modern enhancements, namely a better focus on storytelling, and especially through the characters involved, the NPCs and the villains, which I was very impressed with the fact that every villain, this is only like a 18-page adventure that all takes place in the majority of it in a crypt. There's not a whole lot of room for NPCs even then, but there's still over a dozen either NPCs or villains, of which are basically like the equivalent of like a bandit crew, but they all have names and like stories and backgrounds, which is very impressive and fun to run with as a DM. And you can choose to use that as much or a little as you want. They even have their own little epilogue section at the end. So I thought that was very nice and something that is very much not in line with what a classic dungeon crawl would mean to me. So I think this kind of is the best of both worlds in a lot of ways, where if you just like that just old school classic, like jump into a dungeon where we know some bad shit's going to go down, we're defeating cultists and there's, skeletons and nasty traps and things, and people are trying to sacrifice to their dark gods. Like that's all, it feels very classic. And again, not necessarily in a bad or good way. But then I think this adds a lot more to all that makes this a really quite good adventure, kind of a diamond in the rough, which isn't to say that it's actually rough. It's, again, fully going in, this was the designer, I believe, their first adventure. So I was kind of going, okay, let's see, how rough it is. Honestly, I was pretty impressed. Like, I don't think there was an editor here, but I didn't see anything that was like egregiously poorly written or anything. It's all very well told. It's well organized. It uses art from open clip art, the website, so it's not AI generated art. It's just kind of public domain art, which is tricky to use because usually it's not super high quality, and yet as you flip through here, like, okay, this feels like one of those old e-zines that you could that you were probably extinct by now, but are essentially the equivalent of like a dungeon magazine, but were maybe even a little cheaper produced, but didn't have all the artwork, but still had not color art, but still had some artwork there. That's really what this is, and I appreciate the designer really tried to like utilize that in some cool ways and like say, okay, this is this character, this is that character, and I don't know. I think it actually works pretty well. These tokens maybe notwithstanding, but most importantly, also we actually get a map of the dungeon, which is very cool, and it is in full color. So this is super thumbs up for me because I was worried, looking through all that art stuff going, okay, but then when we get to the actual dungeon that I'm going to look at in terms of the map, it's going to be this kind of, old school graph paper map. Well, no, and this is part of what I mean about like the, more modern enhancements about using, for example, like virtual tabletops. Now, on the other hand, this does not feature a player version that I could tell. It's just this version embedded in here. Now you can pop this out and save it, but you still have the numbers, and it's kind of a little bit of a problem. So hopefully designer can add something like that, or maybe in the future be able to add that going forward, is just having a player version would be super handy to be able to throw that in there. This is a 5th level adventure. That's a really hard level because players all of a sudden reach a huge power spike with getting 3rd level spells, with getting multi-attack, and it's just becomes a lot harder to balance what was, tier 1 play into kind of the beginnings of tier 2 play. I still feel like it's a little on the easy side, but balance is also one of the hardest things for me to comment on because I'm not reviewing this having played the adventure, just from reading through it. It takes place in Somber Hill, which is just a straight up generic town, and the designer even admits this is kind of a generic, not saying the word generic, it's, what are they called? Setting agnostic, right? It can be set anywhere, which my initial thought process was, Why is this on the DM's Guild then? You can put this on Drive-Thru RPG and you won't lose as much money because they don't take as big of a cut because you're not playing with the official D&D lore and the Sword Coast and all the proper names and stuff. There is a like appendix at the end which ties in this adventure into certain official 5e adventures such as Dragon of Spire Keep or Lost Mine of Phandelver. I think there was one or two more that I'm forgetting, but which I think was pretty cool. And that one little 2-page spread is like, I guess that's the reason it's on the DM's Guild, is because that allows you to then bring that stuff up and talk about it. But otherwise, the whole thing can be completely setting agnostic and set literally anywhere. There's a big, of course, dark history with this dude who was up to no good and, made a bargain with this nasty fiend to gain power, and then actually ended up being remorseful and kind of turned things around, but by then it was all too late. So he kind of sealed himself up into this tomb. It was end up his wife and kids ended up getting killed because of his dark scheming, and that kind of made him turn the corner, which does play into the ending and sort of the post-fight epilogue, which I enjoy, because a lot of times what designers do is they'll create this big backstory for the villains or the setting or something, and then I read through the adventure and like almost none of it actually plays out. There's no chance for the players to learn anything, and it just kind of falls flat. Thankfully, that's not quite the case here. And in fact, I think it starts off very well with being a little bit more of an exciting incident where the players are given the quest. Unfortunately, we kind of skip over that quest, which I was annoyed about a previous adventure doing that. It's less irksome here, maybe because it's I don't know, the adventure hooks are a little better. Like the main adventure hook is, hey, they're part of this adventuring company known as the Iron Chains, and they're being sent to this location because they've got some people who have defected, basically, and it turns out they're joined this cult and they're bad guys now. Or there's some alternative adventure hooks you can use where basically just being hired, or maybe some of the NPCs, you have connections there. All of those are pretty good adventure hooks to use. But when the adventure starts, they're already having gotten the quest, and you're showing up at the house of this hedge wizard who had partnered with another scholarly research from out of town to go delve into these recently excavated tomb beneath the city, which is just never a good idea if you're living in this in a fantasy world where undead are at all a thing. And they do hire like mercenaries to go down there, but of course they never return, and that's when the players get hired to come in afterwards as the B team. And when they appear, they actually can stop a kidnapping in the middle of it happening, where there's a bunch of thugs who are trying to kidnap kind of the last person who was involved in that first crew and bring her down because they're, again, sacrificing people, and it's just what bad guys do. So the players can rescue her, and then she can kind of give some additional context about what's going on. It says if given a week to perform research, you can provide PCs with information on the Dark One. I would obviously not spend a week. I would just allow her to like be able to give some of that information. It's a little early and a little bit of an info dump, but it's better than like waiting until the very end of the boss fight before they learn. I don't think the adventure does a great job of necessarily letting you learn about how things are going unless you end up bargaining with a shadow demon, which could end up happening. And again, I would use that opportunity for more social play, which I'm glad that opportunity is at least there. So in order to go kind of cover this dungeon, I'm going to skip down to the actual map screen. It's just easier for me to kind of tell you what's going on from this screen. So again, they've rescued the Irene, the wizard. I can't remember if she actually can accompany the party or not. But there's another captive in there that she wants you to rescue, and then also find out what happened to the mercenaries, and generally just make sure nothing bad is going on down here. Well, of course, spoiler alert, there are bad things going down in here. In fact, there is the members of the Iron Chains mercenary group, which have all been detailed. They're all waiting, ready to ambush the party, which is really interesting because usually when the party's delving into a dungeon or a ruin or something, they usually happen upon enemies, and then sometimes the players can even surprise them, or it's just you notice each other and you're all for initiative. In this case, the enemy is actually pretty well aware that there may be threats. They're like specifically guarding this location against any intrusions. And there's one specific commander on the other side of a portcullis in the middle of this long hallway where the players first arrive. And he's got all of his like named soldiers waiting in the wings of these alcoves ready to attack, including 2 frontline attackers and one wizard back here who can all join in the fight. And again, he's on the other side of a portcullis, so it makes it even crazier that they can do long range attacks. The players can't really get to them. So a really interesting setup with the ambush. But to scroll back up and show you the Dramatis Persona here, which is absolutely insane for a adventure that is this short. I don't get this much detail on adventures that are twice this long in terms of the characters that are involved, unless it's like specifically like a social deduction to where that's like the whole thing. If it's like a murder mystery or something, then you have to know like everything about every character. But I was shocked in a good way that not only are there a bunch of just basically every single like villain, almost, except for I guess the thugs at the beginning is only has one of them who's a named character who can speak. But otherwise, when they get to the iron chains in the dungeon, like all of them, all four of them in the beginning, and then there's one in the boss room at the end, have names and like little backstories and motivations and everything, and they've got their own. They don't have custom stat blocks. They all use stat blocks that are already existing. I believe in the monster manual, maybe in other areas. Commander Reed may have a slight custom stat block, but yeah, Archer, like Berserker, Spy, if they're Cult Fanatic or something, Bard, they all have kind of standard stat blocks, but still, the party doesn't know that, right? And I just think it's interesting to fight kind of maybe a slightly weaker like rival party instead of a bunch of generic like, oh yeah, here's like 3 bandits or whatever. I really enjoy that, having that option of having those kind of characters, and that adds a lot of life and interest for me, the DM, even if it may not even translate to the players unless you make it the opportunity arises. But then in the epilogue, we do get a chance to have like their own little epilogues for all these characters, and if any of them are killed, that actually plays into the way the final battle works as well in a very cool way. And then there's the Dark One, who, as I said, has kind of a change of heart, or had a change of heart, and then when he is downed, then he loses his like special mark or something, and he ends up becoming like remorseful and kind of not a good guy, but the party can kind of work with him at the end, which is, I think, pretty cool. All right, so they make it inside. They can fight some of these enemies. There's a little shadow trap in room number 2 where if they touch any of the sarcophagi, a bunch of shadows will attack them. I think the trap here at room 3, which is a kind of a nexus point to get to multiple areas, is the coolest thing. This is a jail cell open with a bunch of bones, and if somebody walks by, the bones animate and they try to grab whoever is walking by. And if they manage to successfully do that, they do a bunch of damage. They like drain your vitality, they incur exhaustion, and that also opens all the cell doors in area 5, and all those skeletons begin to animate. I wish those were a little bit closer, so it would kind of be more of a, oh shit, all the doors are opening, rather than being like, wait, I hear something down the hall and then a bunch of skeletons like come filing down the hall. That's maybe would have designed that slightly differently, but I like the idea of a trap then triggering a fight. And it does mention the fact that if the players manage to kind of go around these enemies or flank them themselves, then the enemies are smart enough and they're already aware of some of these traps that they will attack the party at their best advantage, to where they'll let the party trigger some of these traps before they try and fight them if they haven't already fought them before. So there's a secret door the players can find. There's a statue that has to be turned. Actually, 2 different statue kind of puzzle areas. One of them raises the portcullis over here in area 6, and the other one in area 9 is pointing towards this open black crystal, which is, of course, always want to touch the black crystal that has a demon voice coming out of it. The other, if you turn it around, then it opens a secret door. The captive's in area 11. I think it does a good job of following that 1/3 rule, basically, where like 1/3 of the rooms have something to fight. 1/3 of the rooms have something for the players to interact with, whether that's a puzzle or it's a trap or just something that involves them like rolling dice. And then the other 1/3 of the room may not have, falls in the other category where it's either empty or maybe has a little bit of loot in it or something. In this case, I think it's pretty well stocked full of all those different things to do. A teleportation circle is just kind of something to note by. There's nothing really to do there. As I said, there's a captive in area 11. There's kind of a mostly empty armory in area 4, but then there's traps and puzzles in all these different areas, and the freaking shadow demon in area 10, which is trapped in a crystal, which tries to, of course, talk to the players using half-truths and explain how, oh, the Dark One betrayed me and I need to, we need to take him out and all this. And of course, he's like the real villain who's been manipulating everybody, because the Dark One has just been sealed and isn't talking to anybody at all. So they all think they're doing this for the Dark One, when in fact they've been doing it for this shadow demon named Halcyon the whole time. Now, here's where things get interesting. At the end, once the party make it through this door and they can try to stop this ritual that's occurring, which, hopefully they can. In fact, the captive isn't even like on the altar ready to die. She's just in the, room waiting her turn, I guess, and they're all preparing it by chanting and things. But if any of the, I think it says if any non-humanoids or sorry, non-undead, so our humanoids, are killed in this dungeon, which obviously all of those villainous Iron Chain Gang members, the 5 of them, count for that, then that's good enough for the ritual to be complete, which is kind of cool. Like there's technically a hidden way that the players can not even deal with the final boss thing and leave everything sealed, as if they manage to not kill anybody in this final area. I don't even know if I want to tell the players that, because that's such a neat little thing. I like the idea of that being a triggered thing, that like, maybe they can even try to stop the ritual, but like because they, maybe they slew like the commander or somebody, and you see his blood like coming down and trickling and filling up the thing, and then the door opens. Also, for every Iron Chain Gang member that's killed, another skeletal guardian rises out of the sarcophagi. That's kind of a cool thing to tie in, maybe if the players are realizing like, oh shit, we're killing these guys and we have to fight basically a version of these guys. I just think that's a neat thing going on in this final area. And then in room 13, we get the actual boss fight with the Dark One, who is a Bodak stat block. And again, I kind of wish we had more interesting stat blocks rather than, I guess Bodak is actually a pretty unused one that's we don't see very often, especially one that's kind of looks like he would just be a spell casting wizard. And I think he's equipped with a magic spear, which gives him some other abilities. There is a weird part where he's supposed to have layer actions, and it mentions the fact that he's got these multiple layer actions that all sound cool: Shadow Step, Dark Pulse, Shadows of the Dead. I couldn't find where these actual layer actions are, though. Like, this is supposed to just reference them instead of explain what they are. But his stat block doesn't have anything about layer actions, and stat blocks normally don't technically include layer actions either. They usually have to be as part of a different, just description of the room or something. So that was a little bit confusing for me. I don't know if that was just a mistake or something's missing, or it's possible I missed it, but I just couldn't see anything in there. And of course, there's a lot of different things that can happen if Halcyon, the Shadow Demon, is there and you made a bargain with him and managed to free him because of that puzzle. And then, he'll help the players fight the Dark One. But then there's different things where he can, basically turn the players into undead, and now you're his servants. Like all these different things that can end up happening, which I really enjoyed. And a very impressive epilogue, I thought, where it goes over like, here's where all these characters are doing, like at the end of this whole adventure, if they haven't been killed, and where they go, and who can be an ally and who can be a wandering enemy for the players, or recurring enemy and threat, and all of that. And what's really fun is after the Dark One is defeated, his curse is lifted, and he actually becomes like a sentient, normal, just undead guy. And he's like, whoa, please don't kill me. Basically tries to tell everything that I just told you during the backstory, which is the Shadow Demon corrupted me, and my wife and kids were all killed, and I have renounced these ways. I tried to seal myself and the demon up in here so nobody could get them. But unfortunately, when I was awoken, I was consumed by his power, blah, 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 whatever is the description here. But there's a little bit of a story choice where the players can make to either spare him or destroy him. And it doesn't really have much bearing either way on the story, but the DM can then choose, and the designer does, to their credit, state like, hey, you can use this undead creature as even like a quest giving NPC. Like they're basically on the level at that point. They are truthfully wanting to try to do the right thing and kind of atone for what they've done in the past. So again, just kind of doing those nice, like, I feel like in an older D&D adventure, and I want to mean older, I mean from like 30 years ago or more or something, we wouldn't have that, right? It would just be a generic villain, probably not even going to say anything, and just fight, and you defeat him, and then you're donezo. Whereas I think here it's a lot better enhanced by some really cool story stuff and just some added, emotional weight to it, while still being kind of a kick-ass, hack and slash dungeon crawl in a crypt with some fun little things to do. So let's go over my pros and cons for the Crypt of Somber Hill. Pros: the detailed dramatis personae with over a dozen NPCs and villains. Holy crap. Again, I did not expect this at all. I was pleasantly impressed by having all this information, and it plays into the story pretty well. I just can't say enough good things about the focus on the characters in what could have otherwise just been a forgettable dungeon crawl. That's too harsh. I think it is well designed, but also there's a lot of well designed dungeons out there, right? I think what is going to set them apart, which this one does, is going to be your story and your characters. And this one did it for me. I think it's got all that. Pro, effective use of black and white clip art. I also didn't expect this to be something I would enjoy, and I did. There's not a whole lot of it, but what's there works really well. The tokens probably not so much on a full color map and a VTT, but all the other artwork actually did draw me in, and I think it looks good. And frankly, it's a great like low budget use of. A great use of art for a low budget product. But then we get the full color dungeon map as another pro. Huge thumbs up for including that. Wish we had a player version, but I'm not going to knock it because I'm just glad we got the full color map in general. I think that definitely enhances things and is just damn near a requirement these days. And pro, optional tie-ins to several D&D adventures. I kind of skipped over this, but the final page, Ghost of Saltmarsh is the one I couldn't think of. It has some really cool ties, and not just like a single paragraph for some of these, but like for Lost Mine and Dragon of Icespire Peak, like specifically like, hey, use these characters in place of these, roles. Use like Hamun Koss from Old Owlwell as the actual captive who's being held by these by the Iron Chain, and change the Iron Chain into red brands. Like, really do some cool twists and changes there. Which I think makes a lot of sense. And because it's a 5th level adventure designed for 5th level, you can actually have this take place like directly after those adventures if you wanted to. Cons, there's missing layer actions for the boss fight. I have to include that as a con because I was like, wait, what's going on here? Like he's supposed to, because I guess also the whole thing feels a little easy, which isn't to say there's not enough fights or anything. There's plenty of battles, but even all the named guys are, like the spy stat block, the archer stat block, like they're not meant to be 5th level threats whatsoever. That's pretty easy. I guess, shadows can be deceptively powerful. A Bodak can certainly be very powerful as a chance to like, knock you to 0 hit points if you're not careful. A lot of people don't fight like a Bodak. You kind of expect like a spellcasting wizard. So in terms of a dude who's alone, but also only the one action still, and I guess he's got some skeletal guardians with him. I don't know. The whole thing feels a little bit under-tuned for 5th level, especially. As I said, that's a big power spike. But the layer actions, at least in that final boss fight, would have helped change my mind on that, but I didn't see them. They're just missing somewhere. It mentions the fact there's layer actions, which is good, but I didn't actually see them detailed. And then con, no player version of the map. I did have to include that as official con, I guess. I probably shouldn't have. I don't know. I have 2 minds of that, but it's actually a really great map. I was like, man, I could throw this in there, and boom, this is an instant crypt dungeon crawl we can use. Throw this in there, meaning put it on a VTT like Roll20. But without a player version, you kind of have these giant numbers in the way, and it makes it a pain in the ass to actually use. So please, please, please include player versions of the maps. That would help immensely. But thank you for the color map. Final verdict, the Crypt of Somber Hill is a classic dungeon crawl with a solidly paced dungeon enhanced with fully fleshed NPCs and antagonists. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. And you can support my work at patreon.com/Rogue Watson. Shouts to Platinum patrons: Joe, Will, Thomas, Stan, Brandon, Xenocider, David, Eclectic, Roleplay Roll, Christopher, Corey, Big Nut, John F., John L., Scott, Eric, Tyler, Nathan, Camp Crystal, Counselor, Andrew, Daryl, the Reldron, Captain Woody 79, Stephanie, Andy, Patrick, Jason C., Jason T., and Ishmael. And gold patrons: RPG Papercrafts, Pretty Boy, Numa, Desert Lounge, Sam, Limpy Spuds, Jerome, Nathan, Fast Like a Tortoise, Scott, Rufus, Carolyn, Jerry, and Thomas. Thank you all very much for your support.